All right, today it's my pleasure of joining Jonathan Cermeli, CEO of Blackwing Consulting. Jonathan has over 20 years of law enforcement experience. He's an executive at the world's largest law enforcement agency. Jonathan, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. I'm excited to have this conversation. We're going to be jumping into kind of your experience in law enforcement, 9/11, time working during COVID, civil unrest, and then how you got into the leadership and training world. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, first off, Tim, thanks for having me. The pleasure is absolutely mine. So, to get started, a little bit about my journey. I was born and raised in New York City. My parents were first generation Italian Americans. I had a great childhood, great upbringing. I was a typical inner city kid that grew up in the 80s with a lot of freedom. And it was, just the home when the streetlights come on kind of thing. And that was it. I'm married with two kids now, and I would never do that with my kids. I try to give them a little bit of freedom, but the world has definitely changed. I always felt somewhere deep inside that I had a calling to help people. I wanted to assist people, and even from a young age, I would see if there was an old lady crossing the street or somebody got into a car accident, I would always beg my dad, "Hey, Dad, could we please stop?" And this is like 5 or 6 years old. We got to help. We got to help. And he recognized that in me at a young age. But I knew that there was something that I wanted to do in that field where I could help other people. But as I got a little older into high school, I realized that law enforcement was definitely something I was interested in. We're going now into the 90s, and the city that I grew up in New York City, was definitely struggling with crime in the early to mid 90s. And so that was something that was always on the front page of the newspapers. I think we were at the height in New York City, the height of our murders was like the early to mid 90s. It was just something I was never afraid of. I never feared becoming a police officer. I just said, this is something that I definitely want to do. I continued on with high school, went to college, and then at 20 years old, September 11th happens, and I'm living in New York City at the time, and I was just like every other American. I was shocked, just in disbelief, saddened, and then I became angered that this could happen. This could happen so close to my home, so close to my family. And I had friends and colleagues that were starting out, that were in financial companies there, and I had my family members that are firemen. And so there were a lot of concerns at that time. And from my house, I could see the World Trade Center, and I could see it. And I used to look at it every day. And those two big, huge buildings, I would look at them every single day. And my father worked actually across the street from those buildings.
Oh, wow.
So I remember being a kid and looking at those buildings, knowing, all right, my dad's at work. On that day, I saw those buildings engulfed in flames, and the smoke was unlike anything I'd ever seen. You could even smell it. And unfortunately, when the buildings finally collapsed, the smoke was everywhere, and it just filled that beautiful skyline. That majestic skyline of New York City was filled with all those that perished, and everybody that lost their lives that day.
How did you know that the buildings had been hit? Were you were at home?
That's a funny story in and of itself. My father was in politics, in city politics, and he was running for city council that day. It was a primary election. And so we were all working the primary, working the voting booths, handing out pamphlets. And I was at a polling site handing out pamphlets when in New York City, in every polling site, there's a police officer, a uniformed police officer that's assigned to the polling site. And I had seen the police officer run out of the polling site. And I said, uh-oh, something must be going on. I didn't know what, but I knew something was happening. We had a campaign van that I was assigned to. So I said, something's not right. People started to look flustered. I jumped in the van and I put on our New York was 1010 Wings, was the radio station. And they were reporting that a plane had struck one of the towers in the World Trade Center. And it appeared to be a small aircraft at the time, was what they were reporting. And, at that point, I was just like, wow, that's crazy. That's unfortunate. And then there was a lot more chaos going on in the polling sites. And now that the police weren't on the scene, they were talking about, are we going to close the polling sites? So I decided to go back to our headquarters where my father had his headquarters for the campaign. And that's when we saw the second tower get struck live on television. And you could see that that was definitely a commercial aircraft. And
Mhm.
I knew at that very moment that obviously the world as we knew it was going to change forever. Everything that I thought up until that point, was going to change. And I knew that we were at war. We were now a nation at war. I knew it immediately. And I looked at my father, and my father was a Vietnam veteran. He served in the Navy, and nothing really phases my father. And he's been through a lot in his life, and he kind of just, he's got an election to run, and he was just like, all right, well, how do we navigate this? We still got this going on. And then we're all talking, his campaign managers, everyone's kind of going over back and forth logistically what this looks like. And then they're reporting on the bottom of the screen that reports are coming in that the Pentagon was hit. And I'll never forget to this day, my father was about to walk out the door and go about the business of the day. He had to, still run this campaign. And I remember him look back. And when he looked back, and I said, Dad, the Pentagon's hit. Like, I think this is really bad. And he looked, and I'll never forget, he took a second pause and he came back into the house. And I think that's when he realized that was the moment for him that he knew this was more than just a localized terrorist attack. He was down in 93 when the World Trade Center first had the truck bombing. He was working across the street. So he dealt with that. He must have thought it was going to be a localized event. And once that happened, I think we all realized this is a little bit more now. And seeing his face that way started to make me realize the severity of the situation was a little bit more intense. He's always been the rock and the steady hand that I look for to remain calm. And when I saw, he didn't lose it, but when I saw his concern, it spoke a million words to me.
So had you been thinking about getting into law enforcement before that then? Had you applied or anything like that? Or just
So
kind of,
so like I said, law enforcement was definitely on my radar. I had taken the test when I was 17 years old, but you couldn't get hired until your 21st birthday, which for me was
wow.
going to be November of 2001. So now at this point, I'm thinking, man, I wish I was there right now. Like I want to help right now. And within, believe it or not, a few weeks, I get a phone call from the New York City Police Department, and they're asking, "Hey, listen, are you still interested in becoming a New York City police officer?" And I never thought I'd even think about it. That was always my dream. It was what I wanted to do. And at that moment, I just everything hit me like I felt like, the answer was so definitive, whatever I told them. And now I'm thinking, oh man, 9/11, New York City, like this is quicker than I thought. I really did not expect that phone call so soon. And I said, yes, absolutely, 100%. What do I have to do? And they said, report tomorrow to this location, and we're going to
Wow.
start medical, physical, background, everything. And they expedited the whole process. And with only a few months after that, I was sworn in as a New York City police officer and started into the police academy.
Were they backfilling the guys who were lost on 9/11, or did it just happen to line up that way?
I think what happened initially, we lost 23 people. We knew that we had 23 people that perished that day from the New York City Police Department, others in Port Authority, and hundreds in the fire department. But we knew that in the New York City Police Department, we were going to have to expand. We were going to have to build up a counterterrorism unit. There was so much that I guess they realized they were probably scheduling a class at some point to go in, but this was an extremely large class now that they were going to put in, and they decided to do. And when I was in the police academy, we were taken out on numerous occasions to do site security, just to help out in any way that we could prior to even graduating down at ground zero. Just anything from directing traffic to making sure that the trucks that were taking the debris out, they were going to landfills over in Staten Island, and anything we could do to help. And at that point, I just being there, and even though I was in a recruit uniform at the time, I felt like people looked at me differently than I'd ever been looked at before. Like, you're here, wow, you're out here. And I said, in my head, and they were thanking me, and they were appreciative, and I didn't think I was doing anything that was out of the ordinary. I thought I was this is what people do. We're helping each other. And it's when I realized that this is a very rewarding position that I'm fortunate enough to be in and I'm blessed to be in.
Right on. So, what's the vibe? You show up on day one at the academy. You're surrounded by all your fellow recruits. Is it somber? Are people excited? And how did they introduce you to the academy?
So at first it was, I think everybody was still trying to wrap their heads around what had happened, what transpired in the city. And we were only, maybe a mile. Our academy was in New York City and Manhattan. It was only about a mile from Ground Zero. The recovery effort was more of a cleanup effort at the time and just trying to get things under control. But that was still underway down there within a mile. But now the nation's at war. And so a lot of my colleagues that I was working with were deployed in the Marines, the Army, and they were deployed in the armed forces, and they started to get sent overseas. And while they were technically still employed with the New York City Police Department, they had to go overseas, and they were, whether they were reservists or whatever their contract or commitment was, it was now all hands on deck. So I started to see friends of mine, going overseas. And although I wasn't in the military, I felt that I had something that I could do here in the homeland. And I knew that at that point, I started to think where I wanted to work. But now I said, when I get out of this academy, I think I want to stay in Manhattan. I think Manhattan, it just happens to be an area that is a target. It's a large population. It's the crossroads of the world. Everything comes through New York City. And I said, that's where I want to be. I think I can make the best impact in fighting off possible terrorist attacks. And that was on the forefront of everyone in law enforcement's mind in the wake of those attacks. And so that's what happened. I wound up being fortunate enough to get assigned into the Midtown area of New York City, which encompassed Times Square, Madison Square Garden, that whole area. And there was nothing like it. I was started on a foot post, walking a beat in Times Square in full uniform, and just I felt like a celebrity. People wanted to take my picture. They'd come up to me. They'd thank me. They would, hey, can you sign this NYPD shirt we just bought? And I'm thinking, again, this is crazy. I'm nobody. I'm just somebody that's, doing what everyone else is doing and doing my part here. But again, I was validated with a sense of reward. It was a rewarding occupation, and it was reinforced by how many tourists from other countries were just coming up to me saying, thank you, and could I get a picture with you? And I'm saying, a picture with me? I mean, my brother and sister didn't even want to take pictures with me, and the whole Christmas growing up, and now these strangers want to take pictures. And so it, again, very, very rewarding feeling. But I always knew the mission at hand, and I always knew that another attack could possibly be imminent, and that was what we were bracing for, another attack. And we knew that these terrorist organizations, as I'm sure as thrilled as they were with the success from their part on the attack, they weren't going to give up, and we knew that. And we knew that time and time again, New York City was always the target. And so unfortunately, when we get thwarted and it never comes to fruition, it's not a sexy story in the media, so a lot of people don't hear about it. But there were many, many plots that never came, thank God, to fruition in New York City, thanks to the hard work of the men and women in law enforcement and our federal partners and everybody that works alongside of us, because of our vigilance and our presence, our omnipresence. We were out there, and we made sure that we were visible, and we had units that were not so visible working behind the scenes and intelligence bureaus. But again, very, very rewarding, very vigilant, and waiting for that. It's kind of looking back, being 21, 22 years old, waiting for possibly another terrorist attack to occur was, most people would think that's scary. And for us, it was just, we were ready. We were just ready for it. So in 2003, now we're not so far off from 9/11. I'm on my foot post in Times Square on 45th Street and Broadway by the Marriott Hotel. And it's, mid-afternoon. And all of a sudden, now you can imagine Times Square with all of those bright lights and the big screens and everything's going on, right? all of a sudden it's like a TV shut off and it went boom. And I looked around and it wasn't nighttime yet, so it wasn't as apparent, but we heard the noise. It was really loud, like just everything shut off. And I said, "What is going on?" Then I saw the street lights were out. And I said, "Uh-oh, this isn't good." So I got on my radio and I asked our dispatchers, "There's something going on in the Times Square area. Maybe there's a power outage or something." And there was no response on the other end from the dispatcher. And I'm trying again and I'm trying again. And there's no response. And I'm like, my battery's not dead. Everything's working. So now I'm looking around and a sergeant grabs me and says, "I think we better head back to the base and figure out what's going on. Let's get back to our base and regroup. Something's going on." And as we're driving back, I saw some pretty bad car accidents because as those lights went out, somebody who's trying to make a yellow street light might have said, "All right." And then all of a sudden every light goes out. We saw some pretty bad car accidents. And, we got out, we try to see, "All right, you're good. Everything. All right, an ambulance is coming." And I wanted to stay there. And I remember the sergeant saying, "We got to get back." It was about a 20-block ride in a police car back to our precinct. And as I got back there, everyone started showing up to the precinct. I saw there were undercover officers. There was our federal partners. I guess some of their protocol is just get to the nearest law enforcement station in the event of a possible attack until we could regroup and figure out what the mission's going to be and what the direction's going to be. So now I'm in my precinct and they're quickly putting us on rosters. And I was one of, I believe, 12 other police officers, and we had a sergeant lead us. And they put my name, said, "Cermeli, okay, you're going to be you're in charge of guarding and evacuating the Empire State Building." So here I am, 22, 23 years old, and literally the Empire State Building is about 5 blocks from the police precinct that I worked at. So we walked down there, and I remember going to a deli, just grabbing water, grabbing batteries, D batteries, because our flashlights back then, we didn't have these great flashlights with LED and everything. We had these mag lights, and I'm thinking, this is going to be a long night without power. And history in 1977, I knew that when the power went out in New York City, which was more of a localized blackout, there was a lot of looting, rioting, things like that. So I was thinking, all right. But again, in the back of my head, and all my colleagues, we're thinking this is a terrorist attack. We're thinking they just took down our infrastructure and who knows what's coming next. So that's the mindset that we're in that era. So here I am, a young kid but a police officer, and it's me and about 10, 12 other police officers, and we're evacuating the Empire State Building, one of the world's largest buildings. And I'm in there and I'm trying to keep people as calm as possible. No one knows what's going on. There's more information coming that now Virginia's out of power, New Jersey's out of power. It looks like the whole East Coast is out of power. And again, there's no time for panic or worry. We just keep working. And that's the theme of anyone who's in the military or paramilitary organizations. The mission has to be accomplished. There's no turning back. There's no time for worry or, reflecting. It's just, this is the mission. This is what has to be done. And people were asking me, "Well, how do I get home? I take the train. So how do I get home?" I said, "You have to walk home." And they said, "But I live 50, 60 miles away." And now there was no traffic coming in or out of Manhattan at that time. And all the trains were down. And these people lived and died by the train schedule. And so I said, "Yeah, the only way you're going to get home is you're going to have to walk over one of the bridges, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, and you're going to have to walk over that bridge and get yourself into one of the outer boroughs and then figure it out from there. Maybe a cab will be running there. I'm not over there and I have no communication with what's going on that side of the river." And people just could not believe what I was telling them. I have to walk. I don't know what to tell you, but you can't stay here. This building is going to be shut down very, very shortly. And we were fighting against the clock because now it's about 5, 6, 7 o'clock and we're losing daylight. And that was something that lasted for a few days. And another
Wow.
challenge that we faced, but we got through it. It wasn't 1977. There wasn't looting and rioting. And again, I attribute that to the men and women of the police department just being out there and being resilient, working long hours. I remember it being extremely hot out that week. It was the end of August, but we went about doing it, and that was what was going on in my head. Like, is this another a terrorist attack or preempt?
Did they figure out what caused the power outage?
To this day, I think they said it was something with the transformers somewhere along the East Coast that just were overloaded and failed, and maybe the infrastructure. I'm not really sure, but that's how it was. It was relayed to us, and when it went back on, it was a good feeling.
Yeah.
It's funny what we take for granted: air conditioning and the simple things, lights, everything else. But yeah, it was an eerie feeling to be in Times Square, and I'll never forget that noise when every single screen, every single billboard just shut down at once. Man, I was like, whoa, that's a moment that I definitely won't forget.
Yeah, that's a scary feeling. So you're being a foot officer. What's your next move career-wise?
So I always want to be proactive. I didn't take this job to just sit around and do nothing. I was never a desk guy, behind the desk type of person. And that's why I wanted to become a police officer, parcel, because I wanted to be out there helping people, but I didn't want to be confined to an office or a cubicle. So I was always very proactive, and I always looked younger than I was. So that helped and hurt me. I don't know if people took me as seriously, but at the same time, I was young and I looked even younger. So, but that quickly worked to my advantage, and I found myself in a plainclothes unit where I was now out of uniform, and we were tasked with all different types of quality of life offenses initially, and then it was, street drugs off the street, street robberies, things like that. And I found that really, really another part of the job that was so much fun and so interesting to me. Back then, yellow taxis were everywhere in Manhattan, and I remember we had a yellow taxi that was an unmarked police car, and it had like lights and sirens and everything, and we used to drive in that, and people would try to hail us down. But it was, you really started to see when you're working in the capacity, like you're in law enforcement now, but people don't know who you are. And when they see you in uniform, everybody is on their best behavior. And when they're not expecting you to be the police, it's funny what you see. And people, at that time, marijuana, people were just smoking marijuana or selling marijuana, or people were snatching bags. That was always big. Tourists were they were taking their cell phones, cameras, things like that. And many times we were just in the right place at the right time, and we blended in. And so it was another rewarding experience just being in that realm. But during that time, I had a ton of fun, and I really just enjoyed what I was doing. But I knew at that moment I was surrounded by really, really good supervisors. I had some really, really good supervisors, and I said, man, I want to do what they're doing. I think I could help the public, but I could also help my colleagues. I could be a leader that looks out for the men and women that work around me. And I said, I think I could affect change by getting myself into a leadership role. And again, very young, but I was driven. I had a lot of ambition, and I said I could do this. It's initially you take a test, and it's a very difficult test that they don't make it easy, and it's about 6 months to 8 months you have to study for this exam. And I did, and I said, you know what? I was fresh out of college. I still had my wits about me. I said I could read some books, and I took some courses, and I wound up doing really, really well on the exam. As soon as I could get promoted, you needed 5 years in rank as a police officer. That was the quickest that you could get promoted, and I did. I got promoted actually on my fifth anniversary of the New York City
Wow.
Police Department. So now I'm 26 years old, and I'm promoted to sergeant. And I said, "Whoa! Like, okay, I wanted this, but now when you get promoted, they move you out of your patrol borough. So now I find myself in Queens, and I'm in an area of Queens that I'm not too familiar with. And now I'm a sergeant. I'm 26, still look very young, and I'm in charge of, in my opinion, grown men. Some of these guys are in their late 50s. They could be my father. And I have to tell them what to do. I have to give them direction. And initially, some of them tested me. Some of them tried to see if they can get over on me. And I was like, no, but I really felt like, man, I'm wearing maybe like my dad's clothes. Like it just it didn't feel like it fit me at the time, in the initial first few weeks. And I was nervous. I had a little bit of apprehension. I knew my role prior to. I was responsible for myself, my partner, and now I'm responsible for others. And that's when it hit me that, okay, I just reverted back to those supervisors and leaders that I emulated, that I looked up to. And I said, what did they do that made me like them? What was it about them that everyone else seemed to gravitate toward them? And I realized they didn't micromanage. They gave us the leeway to do our jobs. They gave us the information to know the why and to understand what is going on and what the mission is. And they always explain that. They gave us the proper tools. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. And so initially, very briefly, I was in uniform supervising about 12 uniform police officers. But based on my background in plain clothes, they put me supervising a plain clothes unit that was now responsible for apprehending violent offenders within that area. So taking guns off the street was very, very prevalent at that time. Shootings were at pretty high at that time. And so and I learned so much, even though I was the boss, right? I always say I was the boss. And I never looked at myself that, hey, I'm the boss, I know everything. I believe that humility is the key to leadership. And so I remained humble. I knew that these police officers were much more experienced than me in the field that they were doing. Mm-hmm. And so I leaned on them. I gave them direction. I knew what the mission was, but I took a step back and learned a lot from them. And I really believe that, that role, that leader, the title or boss, it's a rank, it's a role, but that role means nothing. That role means nothing. It's what's inside of you and who you are as a person. If you're not a real leader, you could pass the test and go out there and be a very ineffective leader. But I didn't know what I was doing and what skills I was applying in leadership. It was my natural habitat was to just be humble. And I knew that these guys knew more than me and I'm going to learn from them. And we wound up taking almost 50 illegal guns off the street that year. It was a major search warrant where we took 19 guns out of a house. And again, extremely rewarding. And at this time, it was a lot of fun. I mean, people would think I'm crazy, but chasing bad guys, chasing after them with guns and vehicle pursuits and everything that we did, I knew it was protecting the neighborhood that I was serving. And every gun that I got off the street, I said to myself, this is a gun that could be used to kill another police officer or that could be used to kill an innocent civilian. And it was rewarding, dangerous work when I look back, but I never thought of it as dangerous. I got into a lot of police-involved car accidents because, man, we would just go. We couldn't get there fast enough. If we heard a shooting, we would move in and we would get in there. But again, no matter how bad or banged up I was, I remember one accident, they had to pry me out with the jaws of life. And I got out of that car and I knew I was banged up. I remember I had a gun on my ankle. My secondary weapon was on my ankle. And I remember I couldn't even lean to get it. And when they pulled me out, they put a backboard behind me and just kind of extracted me from where the roof would have been out of the car. And I remember thinking, I want to move around, but I was in a seat collar. And I said, I want to move around just to feel like, am I all right? And I knew that I was like a little banged up after going to the hospital. The next morning I woke up. But I said, you know what? I can't miss the day of work. It was that much fun. I went back within like a day or two and I said, I'm fine. Everything's great. And you know what? I was young. I did bounce back and I worked through the aches and pains, but I wouldn't miss it. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I just didn't want to be home. I didn't want to be home while they were out there doing God's work. And I couldn't sit on the sidelines, especially I knew that I was the supervisor there, that I wanted to have a role in what was going on and that positivity. So that was my career as a sergeant. I said, okay, well, what's the next test? Where do we go from here? And it was lieutenant. So I took that test, studied, worked hard, studied, passed that test, and quickly found myself in a role based on my prior experience of now supervising multiple plainclothes units. So I had multiple sergeants under me with their teams. And I'll never forget one of the police officers that worked for me. We became very tight over the 5 years that I worked as a sergeant in this plainclothes, was called an anti-crime unit. And he said to me, "Hey, don't be a jerk. Don't be one of those guys. Now that when you become lieutenants, we wear white shirts now." And he said, "Now you need a white shirt. Don't change. Don't change. Because everybody, the power goes to their heads, right?" And I said, "Change. I'm who I am." Like, that's really how I felt. I said, "I'm going to change." But I guess the power does go to people's heads, and they forget where they come from, and they don't remain humble. And I'll never forget he said that to me. And I said, "No, I won't change." And so now I'm a lieutenant, and I'm assigned to a different area. And again, I'm in charge now of multiple units, and it was my wheelhouse. This is what I love to do. And a great experience. I met some of the best men and women that I would ever, still friends to this day. And just to keep the story going, now the next rank is a big difference, because now captain is you're now an executive at the executive level within the New York City Police Department. So for those of your audience that may not know, we're a paramilitary organization, but we follow the United States Army regulations as far as rank structure. Our insignia is all the same. The only difference is, so we have a sergeant, lieutenant's the gold bar, captain's 2 bars. Then we have an oak leaf, which would be a deputy inspector, and it would be a major for the Army. And then you'd have a full eagle, which would be a colonel. And then the stars are generals. We call them chiefs. So at this point, I become a captain. I decided to take the captain's test, and that was a decision I had to make with my family, because that's a completely different role. As a sergeant and lieutenant, you could kind of punch out at the end of work, and your day is pretty much over. Maybe somebody else will take your spot. But as the executive, that's it. Regardless of where you are, your phone's ringing, or you got to be checking your emails, and you're responsible now for a precinct. Some precincts are 100, 200, some are 300, 400 people.
Wow.
It's a lot. And you represent a community. You're almost like a politician. You have constituents, right? You have multiple areas, towns, neighborhoods that are looking to you to keep crime under control. But it's not just keep crime under control. It's public relations. It's community policing. There are so many different facets that go along with now being a captain. It's not just let's get some guns off the street and run after the bad guys. It's now, how do you present your vision, your mission, which ultimately is going to be the mission of the New York City Police Department. But as things happen and they shift on the fly, they're going to task you with getting the men and women that work for you in your assigned area to also adhere to that mission. And that's where you have to be a strong leader, because people don't like change, right? Most people don't view change. We get comfortable in where we are until you understand that being uncomfortable equates to growth. And these are things that I've only learned recently, but I realized that every time I changed, whether I wanted to do it or not, I was better off for it, and I learned from it. You're either going to win or you're going to learn. So I quickly started to realize, and I was changing all over the place, because every time I got promoted, I was moving. So I become a captain. I had the support of my family, which I tell all the captains now, you really need to, prior to taking that test, just make sure you have the support of your loved ones behind you. If you have no loved ones, maybe it's even easier for you. But if you do have people, just make sure that, because this is a very rewarding, but yet very demanding position. So I become a captain. And after captain, there are no more tests, no more written tests. It's all appointments through the police commissioner, through the mayor's office. So it gets very political after that. And you really have to start making a name for yourself on your own. It's not just take a test, go for an interview. Now your reputation. And I was told when I became a captain, whatever you did before this, great. And I thought I had this illustrious career. I did so many great things. And they said, but now you're a brand new executive. Your reputation starts today. And I said, oh, okay. But what about all those other things I did? They said, that's great. And that'll shape you to be a really good executive, but it starts now. So I'm a captain. I'm running a precinct, and I become the commanding officer of one precinct. I do well in that role. become the commanding officer of a second precinct. And it was on that second precinct. So now it was right before COVID. So right before 2020, I'm slated to take over that precinct, and I move into that chair as the commanding officer. And that area was a part of Queens, Corona, Elmhurst, that very densely populated area. And it was a great hardworking people in that area, but it wasn't a wealthy area. So you had a lot of people living, in small apartments on top of one another. And so now COVID hits. And I knew the area was known to be violent prone. It had some violence there, gangs. So I knew that was what I was getting myself into. And as you move up from one precinct to another, usually that's the progression. You go to a busier place, and you're in charge of more people, and it's more vigorous as far as the crime goes. But now, 2020, right around February, March, and something called the coronavirus is something again that people are talking about it's happening in China or whatever. Couldn't be further away from America. So what did it matter to us? Okay. And then you start to hear, well, there's a case in Alaska. There's a case here. Looking back, it seemed like I heard the word coronavirus, and it seemed like the next day was at my doorstep, where it really decimated the area and the people that lived in the area that I was tasked to police and protect.
How are your guys? I mean, coronavirus comes in. What's kind of the mood of all your officers? Are they wanting to come in, or are they nervous about, man, I don't want to come into work and deal with all this stuff and start, putting themselves and their family at risk?
So I'll say this again, and it sounds redundant and repetitive, but I guess this could be the theme for what we're doing. We just keep showing up. We just keep showing up, and we don't have time to think about it. And I did not have time to think about it. I never worried once about getting this coronavirus or whatever. Never did I think that it was going to affect me. Just like I never thought I'd be hurt or shot or anything. I felt invincible. I always did. And I said, I'm here and I'm going to help people, and I'm healthy. I'm a healthy individual. And the men and women that worked alongside of me all felt the same way. And we showed up to work, and just like 9/11, when everybody was leaving Manhattan and we were coming in, here's the coronavirus. Everyone is told, shelter in place, stay home. Again, it's like unprecedented. There's no rule book for this in 100 years. But no, we're coming to work. We're not working remote. Our job doesn't work like that. So
what's your wife thinking?
So wife and kids are now getting nervous. The kids were like, "Oh, that's going to be great. There's no school, right?" And that lasted for about a week of them being happy that there was no school. And then they started to go stir crazy, and they couldn't see their friends, and they couldn't do anything that was normal. I now was going to work in a place that was dubbed the epicenter of the epicenter. So New York City was a hotbed for this. But where I was working was really hot and heavy. We had a hospital called Elmhurst Hospital, and that was on the national news almost every night, because the number of patients that were being admitted and intubated in that hospital and then unfortunately dying was astronomical. But what's more surprising and scary was the patients that never even made it there. They died within their apartments and in their homes. And I always said that when someone dies in New York City, a police officer has to remain with them and that the deceased until a medical examiner comes. And that's usually maybe one a day, 2 a day if they're an elderly person, is sick at home, hospice care. But in this, it just kept going up. It was 4 a day, 7 a day, 12 a day. And the officers were just being stretched thin. They weren't thinking of that, oh my God, the death and destruction all around us. And this is sad, but we had to keep going and keep showing up for work. And now, I always say we were dodging invisible bullets because we didn't know, like, okay, wear this mask. Is this going to help? Gloves? Does that help? Or antibacterial? And while this is all going on, the criminals, I guess their business continues too, because the shootings are still going on. And I remember responding to a shooting a few weeks right after this is like blown up. The pandemic's everywhere. And I get there and I'm pulling up and I got somebody shot on the floor. And I'm not thinking about a mask. I'm not thinking about like this person's like gasping for air. People, and I'm just going to police mode. I'm telling the people that are with me, my colleagues, all right, we're gonna do this, we gotta do that. The suspect might be in this house, we're gonna go after, we're gonna get set up, we're gonna get our emergency service team, which is like our SWAT team, we gotta get them set up. And everybody just showed up like this is what happened. This is business as usual. Nothing really changed for us um, in the fact that we had to continue to show up. But one thing that did change was we started to feel that 9/11 gratitude again from the people that we were surrounded by. And people realized people are good by nature, and being in law enforcement, you can get jaded and you can start to think that the world is a very dark place because you see trouble everywhere and you see a lot of the bad element and you're focused on that. You're looking for that, actually looking for trouble. But people, the vast majority of people are just such good human beings. And we're so lucky to be in a world that we have such great human beings. And they realized that the first responders and the people that had to continue to show up, they were thankful for that, and they would show their appreciation in any way that they could, and that again was another rewarding feeling. So it wasn't like I was leaving my home. I would leave my home. I would get changed in my garage. I didn't want to bring the clothes that I had on, and I'd put them into a garbage bag, I remember, and then I put another set of clothes on, hop right in the shower before I could even say hello to my wife and kids. And that was, again, not normal, but it was normal. It was like,
Yeah.
well, that's what I have to do, and that's what we're going to do. And that was what was going on. It's always nice to be appreciated.
Mhm.
It's always nice when people recognize, your work. And another key principle in leadership is recognizing those that work for you and letting them know that. How often we don't say things. If somebody does something nice for us or we expect it or we don't say anything, but just letting someone know, hey, thank you. You didn't have to do that. You held the door for me. Thank you so much. That was really nice. Have a great day. Little things like that go a long way. And it did for me when people were thanking me. It made me realize if I ever had a thought in my mind, man, everybody else gets to stay home and I'm going into work. And I didn't think it because I said, no, there's so much appreciation for the things that we're doing. And it felt great.
Were you losing a bunch of guys during COVID out sick, and how did that affect your leadership? You're the lieutenant, you're in charge of a bunch of dudes. How did you navigate that? Is it just suck it up and work more? Or?
Yeah, great question, actually. I didn't even think to bring that up. So every captain in the precincts that were around us, we had to go on a conference call and we reported to our chief, who oversaw multiple precincts. And going from crime strategy meetings that we'd often have became about, okay, we're going to go around the room. How many of your personnel are out sick? And it was, on a general day, if you have 300-400 people that work for you, maybe you have, 5 or 6, 10 people out at most. And it was like, all right, I have 70 people out sick. And then it was like, and when you say out sick, it's not like I had a headache.
Yeah.
We had police officers dying. I knew people that died from this. And so it was like they're out sick with this coronavirus that is still very unfamiliar. We don't know how to treat it exactly. And people are dying. Once it was like almost a death sentence for some people. They got it. They went to the hospital and you didn't see them. And what a sad way to die. Nobody could come in to the hospital. You couldn't even see your loved ones in their last moments of life. Terrible, 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 all the way across the board. But how do you navigate that? You do more with less. And that's what we were doing. We managed. Once again, we kept going. And we would keep going until there was one person left. The one person that was left standing would be running the whole place because we don't give up and we just keep moving forward. We did a lot more with less. Obviously, we went to longer shifts, no days off, things like that. And we just kept working to increase the manpower. And we got through it. in getting through it, it was as we saw people coming back, police officers, sergeants, as they started coming back, that was rewarding. I said, whoa, people are coming back from this. They can make a full recovery and a return. And that gave us hope. And seeing those officers return to work was really, really, it gave us a lot of peace of mind. Like, okay, maybe this isn't the death sentence for everyone. So, all right, this is good. This is good. People are returning. And as soon as that happened, we had the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, we're still in the middle of this pandemic. And again, something that seems so far away from New York City is brought right to our doorstep once again in the form of protests, large protests. And most of the protests start off with people just wanting to voice their frustration, their anger, and opinions. And that's what America's built on, and we allow that, and that's fine. I mean, and then there started to become another faction of the protesters that started to, I don't know if they were opportunists or they decided they were just going to jump on this bandwagon and get crazy. Maybe they were stir crazy from being locked, away for so long with COVID. But whatever the case was, it now became violent. And there were acts of violence towards the police, and there was looting, and there was vandalism, and they were burning down cities. And in certain cities, they were taking over police stations. And all of those things that were happening across the country, people were mimicking here. They were trying to now protest and take over police stations and fight with the police. And I'm thinking, man, there's still a pandemic. We're still wearing masks. And now I'm feeling like everyone hates us. But once again, it's just the loud voices. It's the loud minority, but they're the loudest. And everybody else was still protecting themselves from this virus. And so they were home working remotely. And we're on the front lines once again, getting bricks thrown at us, Molotov cocktails thrown at us. I was watching New York City police cars burn to the ground. And again, I'm saying these are human beings doing this to us. And they would tell me, screaming at me, quit your job. You should quit your job. And I said, quit my job. First of all, you're in the middle of a roadway, right? And with hundreds of people. If I walk away right now, cars are going to hit you. We're protecting you as much as, and the heinous things that you're calling me and my family and all these things, that doesn't bother me. I have a thick skin, and we all have thick skin, and we're trained for that, and we just deal with that. And I know that these people don't know me personally. They're just taking their aggression out on law enforcement. But I try to have some rational conversations and say, but do you realize, like, if I leave and I quit and everybody quits and you're going to stay in the streets, well, who's going to protect you? Who's going to shut the streets down? And who's going to put these fires out that everyone's burning in these buildings? And I felt bad for the business owners too, because especially during COVID, if they were still open and maybe on a limited basis, just trying to recover from that pandemic, now they're getting their businesses burnt. And again, I understand the frustration, and it was a tough time in this country. But for law enforcement, it was also a very challenging time. And it felt like now we were navigating something once again completely different, but we showed up and we showed up and we showed up. And now we have the pandemic and we have the protests, the civil unrest of 2020. And it seemed like people the rhetoric became a very anti-police rhetoric. And defund the police became a thing, and you started hearing that. And in certain cities, they were actually defunding the police. And to me, that was such a crazy defund the police. And here I am. I'm a good police officer. I would never think to do anything bad to anyone. I'm here to help people. I think of all the things I've ever done without even processing it, putting my life out there for everyone else. And I'm saying, defund us? You want to defund the police? And I get it. I get it. A tragedy occurred. And I always said, man, when tragedies occur in hospitals, they have malpractice insurance. the doctor, maybe the surgery goes awry, something wrong happens. Maybe the doctor's just a really bad doctor. Maybe the doctor was on drugs. I'm not saying there's an excuse. That doctor should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But you can't call to defund the hospitals. You can't say, let's close the hospitals now. You have to address the problem. And the problem is such a small, percent, and you have to address that. And I believe in police reform. I believe there was a necessity for police reform. I always believe there's in anything. You can't just say everything is great and we're never going to change. There's always room for improvement. There's always time for a discussion. And there's always room to reform and get better. And I love that. And I don't mind reform, and I don't mind any of that. But to say, let's shut it down, policing is no longer what we need to do. It was a knee-jerk reaction. And unfortunately, it picked up steam. And I'm thankful that cooler heads prevailed over time. And I think we're coming out of that.
How do you keep your guys' morale up during that? And I assume you probably lost some people who just, hey, this isn't for me. They don't want to deal with this kind of negativity in their own life. I mean, you're bringing all that energy your way, and a lot of guys bring that stuff home. How do you keep your guys' spirits up, and guys who struggle in law enforcement? What would you recommend your leaders? How do you keep those guys to stay positive? Because so many guys are getting out of law enforcement these days, and a lot of people don't even want to put themselves in that position anymore. We need good cops. It's hard to find them.
So you're right. You're 100% right in the fact that law enforcement, the recruiting effort right now in law enforcement is a challenge. There's still the calling. People still want to do the work of policing. They still want to help. They still have that nature. But there's, whether it's parents, friends, family members, loved ones, or their own conscience telling them, I may do the right thing, but then maybe they don't see it that way, or it gets spun in the media, or something. I have to worry now about maybe being sued civilly or criminally. And it depends. Even if I'm doing the right thing, and I always told my officers, if you act in good faith, and you'll be fine. If you're going to go out there and you're going to do criminal acts, and we've had bad cops and done bad things, they've taken money when they shouldn't have, and crazy things like that, that's a problem. And you're going to get caught. It's just a matter of time, and you're going to go to jail. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your pension. You're going to lose everything. You'll lose your family. But if you act in good faith, I always truly believed that you'd be okay. And what does that mean if you act in good faith? Well, you're wrestling with somebody that committed a crime, and you're fighting with them, and they're trying to grab your weapon, and maybe they die in your custody. You didn't go there with the intention of killing that person, maybe, or you didn't have those. And so you could articulate that, and you say, no, this is what my mindset was at the time. I think a lot of young men and women are saying, well, maybe I could take a safer job and occupation somewhere else, even though that's what I want. So to your question now, how do I keep the people around me? And this is one of the most challenging things, right? I have to sell them on being a police officer where everyone's screaming at them saying, you suck, you're the worst, they're calling them terrible names. There's still a pandemic going on. Their family maybe even asking them, hey, this is too dangerous. We want you to, think about something else, or maybe even go work in a smaller department somewhere else, where you don't deal with this at such a level and the volume. And what I did was I would get front and center often, and I'd get out there with the men and women that work for me. Again, humility. Never thought I was better than anyone else. I realized I took a few tests that maybe they didn't take, they didn't study for, whatever it was. I always felt that we're all in this together. I said, so we wear a patch, New York City Police Department. I wore that patch. I said, you wear that patch. I wear that patch. We're a family. We're brothers and sisters. I'm in this with you. Believe me, if someone wants to hurt a cop, they're not going to look at me and say, well, he's a captain. He's the inspector. He's a lieutenant. They look at us and go, they're the police. I'm the police. You're the police. People ask me what I do for a living. I say, I'm a police officer. I don't say I'm a captain. I'm an inspector. I'm a police officer. That's what I am. So I let them know that we have an amazing job to do. And sometimes that job could be fun and we love it and it's rewarding and people will tell us that. And sometimes the loud voices drown out the majority of the good voices. And it's the loudest voice that we hear. But I always try to keep them in focus and say, look, this is not going to last. It cannot sustain. We're going to come out of this. We're doing such a good job coming to work, keeping people safe. This is a bad situation that we're in right now, but we are going to get through this. And you have to believe that. And the reason that you became a police officer was to help people at their worst. And it might not seem like we want to help these people right now that are throwing stuff at us, but at some level, we're out there and we're protecting them. And that message really needs to get out there. It's unbelievable work that goes against human nature to protect people that are trying to hurt you. And we do that all the time. And for a while there, I don't know if the media was putting it out there, but it was always like somebody could shoot at one of our cops, even maybe kill a cop. And we get them. And once the handcuffs go on, that's it. You're going to be treated with dignity and respect, and we're not going to mess up a case, and we're not going to go after you and try to get a sucker punch in on you and anything else. That's it. Now, that's not human nature. You shoot or kill your brother or somebody else. People say, give me 5 minutes alone with that person. We have to be so professional and change our mindset that that's not allowed. That's not. So be professional. And that was what I always told the men and women that work for me. We have to be professional. I know it's not easy. This too shall pass, and we'll come out of this ahead, and we'll be better for it. And it'll be a part of a historic moment in time, but we're needed. And I would always let them know, one of the biggest drivers that motivates many of the men and women that have worked for me, I always bring it to this point. The 911 calls that we receive are so frequent in volume, and you forget, it just becomes another job. You're like, okay, I'm going to this person that's shot. And it's like, what? Anybody else be like a person? You've seen people that are shot, or burglary in progress, robbery, gunpoint robbery in progress, and we go. But imagine if that was your mother calling you, right? Imagine mom calls you and says, hey, Johnny, they got a gun. They're in the house. They're in our house right now. How would you respond to that job differently? Would you respond differently? And if you would, I would ask them to think about that when you receive that next assignment. Treat everyone like it was your own family. And so if you work from that assumption, you start to work a little bit differently. Because guess what? That is somebody's mother. That is somebody's sister, brother, daughter, loved one, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. That is someone. They're calling you because they have no one else to help them. And so we have the onus to do that. We have that awesome responsibility to help people. So keeping the men and women adhering to the mission, it's one thing to tell them, okay, we have to help people and we have to go out there and but to get them to do it, there's a way to inspire them and to make them want to do it. And that's again, I didn't realize what I was doing. I was just motivating the men and women that work for me. And I said, okay, it seems like it's working. It's working and they're doing the job. It made my life easier. It made my job a lot easier because I worked with some great men and women, and I gave them, this is the mission. This is why we're doing it. This is how we're going to do it. And I would take feedback and input. And there were many times I've had people tell me, with all due respect, sir, what if we do this and that happens? And I think about it and I go, you're absolutely right. I should have thought of that. And thank you for bringing that to my attention. And I would always end with saying, does anybody have another solution or anything that we could add to this? Now, when you ask questions, especially if you're doing a leadership conference or something else, nobody wants to raise their hand, but you have to make them feel comfortable and make them feel that they are part of the team. And when they feel part of the team and you give them that autonomy to make a difference, and you don't, there's no bad questions here. So I might say, you know what? I like where you're getting and I appreciate your input, but I think it might go better if we stick to the original plan. And that's okay. You're not going to sit there and scold someone. That was a silly question. That was stupid. So we have to take input and feedback from those around you. Like I said, these are all professional men and women doing amazing work, and they may see things a little bit differently. And so you got to take that feedback. And I've always put them in a position where they could speak up. I always felt like I was one of them. I never felt any different, and I let them know that. So they always felt free to come to me with any of their concerns, anything that we should do differently. And I think creating an environment like that. So I often said, in the fire department, FDNY and the NYPD, right, were first responders, very similar in many ways. But I always felt that the camaraderie within the fire departments were much better. And if you went into any firehouse in New York City, the group of people that were in there that were working, I said, it's just like a family. And I said, well, how come it's not like that when you walk into a police precinct? There's a lot of animosity. And I said to every place that I've been in charge that I've led, I said, that's not going to be here. I want you to be able to come here and say, this is my home. This is when I'm in the confines of this precinct, this is a safe place. There's enough people out there that are maybe trying to hurt us, but we're safe in here. And I would tell all my supervisors, when the police officers come in and they're going to have a meal and they want to just sit down and take a break and they're going to eat, let's not go over business with them. Let's not burden them with other things or a disciplinary issue that's pending. I want them to come in here and feel that this is family, that this is a place where we're all in this together and it's a safe environment. And that's what I did. And I tried to do that to the best that I could possibly do. And that, believe it or not, it's that appreciating, thanking people, giving them that autonomy to make the changes on their own. Everyone's a leader. And I always tell them that. And a lot of people don't. They tell me, I don't want to become a sergeant because I don't think I'd be a good leader. You're a police officer. You carry a firearm. You're out there every single day telling civilians, get back, do this, don't come here, or help me with this. I have to get this person that's trapped in a vehicle. I'm running into a suspicious device in Manhattan. I'll stay here. You set up a perimeter. That's being a leader. And they don't even realize it, but you're a leader. We're all leaders. And when you let people understand that they're leaders and you give them that responsibility that, hey, you're a leader. I can't be there all the time. First of all, I'm not a micromanager by nature, but I can't be there. I can help you. I'll answer any questions and I'll give you the proper guidance, but I cannot be watching you 24/7. So to the point of one of the things I teach often is being a good leader is really to inspire the people that work for you so that when you're not around, they want to do the job and adhere to the mission that you set forth. And they'll do it blindly because they know that they have faith in you as their leader. They say, you know what? This is a good person. It's a good human being. He wouldn't send us on a bad course. He wouldn't ask us to do something that he wouldn't do. And he may not be even working today. He may be on vacation, but no, we're going to do this. And I've seen many different types of leadership styles. And you have that leader that says, I'm the boss. And you're going to do this because I'm the boss and I outrank you. And we're in a paramilitary organization. And how dare you question me? And guess what? The job will get done. It will. In the immediate short term, if you want to keep your job, if you want to stay out of trouble, you're going to do the job. But in the long term, that's going to develop resentment. There's going to be a hatred towards you. And people are going to try to sabotage you the quickest way they can. And they will, once you're not around, they'll do anything they can to do whatever it is that you told them to do. They'll try to do the opposite. So you're going to get short-term results by being that dictator, that boss. And that's what I try to break out of people, because sometimes it's easier. Why do I have to do this? Or why should we do this? Because I said so, right? And sometimes that comes with that power of being that I'm the boss now and I could say and do this. Those are the most ineffective leaders that I have ever seen, lead. And I could give you one more example about that. I remember when I was in a precinct where we had a major crime problem going on, and we needed more officers to help us. So it was in the summertime, and they decided, okay, we're going to give this precinct, let's say 30 more police officers, a few sergeants, and then maybe 2 lieutenants, and for the summer. And it was a summer detail. Now, they're uprooting people. Remember what I said about change. People don't like change. They only change sometimes when they're forced to or because they have to. In this case, they were changing because they were forced to. They might have been junior in their positions. So they took police officers from all these different precincts, uprooted them from their precincts, and said, well, you're the junior guy, so we're bringing you to this new precinct that you've never worked in before, but this is why we need you. And you're going to have the worst days off, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you're going to work all night long for the duration of the summer or until this gets corrected, this condition. So I remember the person that was in charge at the time, before I was a captain, and just like berating these officers and telling them, you're doing this for me and you're going to be out there, and so help you God if you're not being proactive and doing what I ask. And I don't care that your days off suck. And, I was in your shoes. I had it bad when I was new. And so this is a rite of passage. And I watched as these people were being beaten down verbally. And I said, wow, that's not my leadership style. But again, the rank structure, I didn't say anything. I just watched this transpire. And what I also watched transpire was that throughout the course of that summer, multiple officers wound up going sick. They just got sick. A few got pregnant. I mean, maybe I don't know if it was planned or what, but and it was disgruntled, and the productivity was not there. It was not there. They didn't go above and beyond. And I don't think that the mission that we were looking to accomplish was accomplished, or at least to the level of effectiveness that it should have. Now, fast forward a few years later, I'm now in charge of a precinct that has the similar response. And I said, okay, the response was to give me more officers. They're helping me out. And I get all these officers. Same sad faces came in, different people, but I knew, again, now I have empathy and I have humility, and I lead by those principles. So I feel bad for them. I say, wow, I can understand what they're going through. This is not fun. This is not good. But how do I get them to produce? How do I get them to adhere to the mission? So I state the obvious. I introduce myself. First, I say, I need every single one of you to help me. I need help. I need help in my precinct. I cannot do this alone. I need your help. And this is how I need your help. Okay, so now I tell them why I need their help. I tell them, this is what we're going to do. I tell them why I need their help and how they can help. Well, they're not just cheering. They're not applauding me at this point, right? They're like, all right, great. We're going to help this guy. So I said, I understand that your days off aren't great. Your summers, you feel like you're uprooted from your precinct. Here's what I could do for you. I don't have a lot. I can't give you $1 million, but here's what I can do for you. And I'll promise you this. If you need a day off, you want to take Saturday off, you want to take Sunday off, take Saturday, Sunday off. I have 32 of you. Does it matter if I have 28 of you, 27? Take off, work it out amongst yourself. They can't have 20 people taking off Saturday, but if 2 or 3 of you say, okay, and maybe the other 2 say, oh, how about Friday? No problem. I have no issues with that. I don't want this to be a negative thing. I want you all to feel you're coming to work, and I'm going to have you back. And listen, all I ask in return, if you see a crime in progress, please obviously, address it. But if you see, a quality of life offense, someone's drinking or smoking or doing drugs or something like that, let's stop that at its inception. Maybe even if it's writing a summons for it or giving a warning, because now people will know, okay, the police are out here. So it'll deter them from committing further acts of larger crimes. But I said, you might not believe me, but what I'm going to do is all I ask in return is that you just answer the radio, help us out, help my other officers out, so freeze them up a little bit. And in return, not only will I give you any days off that you need, and if you take every Saturday off and your friends are fine with that and your colleagues are okay with that and it's working, take every Saturday. That's okay. I don't mind, as long as the job is being done. Now, On top of that, he said, I have a really good relationship with a lot of the other commanders that I work with. So when you do go back to your precinct, if there's an assignment that you want or you desired in that precinct, I promise you that I will personally put my name on a recommendation for you. All I ask is that you just show up and you work. And then I showed him a few of the benefits of being here. I said, and at least you know this is where you're going to work every day. I promise you that they're not going to farm you out and send you to other assignments throughout the city as things come up. You will be assigned here. You know, this is where you're going to be working. I will make sure that, you're treated with the utmost respect, just like everybody else is that works for me in this precinct. And I tell you, just having that, I think they walked away and said, first off, I think this guy's normal. They probably said, oh, okay, because I had my sister's wedding and I was afraid to ask. And I have, this coming up and my girlfriend's birthday party and the family reunion. And, oh, okay, so maybe I don't have to miss those days. And then as they started to see, I would check in on them and I would, go see them when they were out in the field and I thank them. I'd say, man, thank you for being here. Thank you. You're helping me out so much. You don't even realize just your presence and the people seeing you feel safer out here. It's a crime-ridden area and they feel safer and we're cleaning this area up. And thank you so much for being out here. Hey, how's everything working out with you? Everything good? Do you need time off? Is everything, no, boss, everything's great. Thank you. No, I appreciate everything. And at the end of that, not only did people not go sick, but at the end, I had a few people that requested to remain permanently in my precinct. And I had a few people the following year request to come back to that same assignment. And I said, wow, again, not being analytical and trying to figure out what I did right or wrong, just being a human being, being normal, having empathy, putting myself in other people's shoes and saying, how would I feel if I was in this, right? I wouldn't like it. I would be, but what would make me feel better? What could make me want to do the job better? So I remembered the one style of leadership didn't work. And I knew the way I would have approached it, but I couldn't. And now I'm in a position of having the power and authority to do so. And that's what I chose to do. And it worked. And that's basically, how I just navigated leadership is always treating people with respect. And I don't care. I would mop my own floor. I remember people would look at me and go, boss, why are you mopping the floor? Sir, we'll mop it for you. We'll get somebody. We have custodians. And I said, because what would I do in my house? I don't have, police officers, sergeants, custodians. If I need something clean, I clean it. I'm not above anyone else. So it's okay. Thank you. And I know maybe it looks funny or whatever, but I want my office to be clean, then I'll clean it. I'm capable of doing it, but thank you. And I think people realize that. Listen, you're not going to get everyone to love you. You're not going to get everyone to adhere to your mission. But if you could get the vast majority, and what I do now we'll just fast forward a little into what I do now. Mm-hmm. So 20 years of operational experience in the New York City Police Department. And after a little over 20 years, I get asked, do I want to come to the training bureau? Now, I've been in patrol and on the streets for 20 years. So the training bureau, and what would I do in the training bureau? They tell me, we would like you to train all of the newly promoted supervisors in the NYPD. So you'd be in charge of the leadership training section and strategic communications. Sergeants, lieutenants, captains that newly get promoted, they go through a course that I run the curriculum for. They have a staff that teaches that, and we implement scenario-based training and all different leadership skills that we think would be helpful to them in their transition and getting them prepared for their role when they finally go out in the field. And I thought about it and I said, this is different than anything I've ever done. But I said, okay, all right. This is change. Change equals growth. This will be something. And I did. And from day one, when I got before a group of young sergeants and I saw myself in them, and I said, wow, I can see this working out. And as I was talking to them, I didn't realize like I'm 20 something years older than them. I felt like we're all the same. And I'm saying to myself, I guess I do have a little experience in doing this. And I've seen things that worked and I've seen things that didn't work. And I learned more from my failures than my successes. Sometimes my successes, like I alluded to prior, I didn't even know why I was successful until I studied leadership. So You win at something and you just take it for granted and that's it. But when you fail at something, we're our own worst critics. And so I really would then take a deep dive. I don't want to do that again. So how do I correct that behavior? And I do an analysis on why the mission failed, why I failed at that. And so I teach a lot about what it is that I did that went right and what it is that I did that went wrong and how they could avoid making those same mistakes. And so it's interesting because I get the opportunity to not only train newly promoted supervisors who are taking a supervisory position to then mid-level management all the way up to the executive level training, a totally different world. And they all come into the class with apprehension and with some level of nervousness. And we always ask, who here is nervous? You get, we're police officers, right? But some people admit it. I say, good, I'm proud of you. And everyone else, you're nervous too. And if you're not, something's wrong with you because you should be nervous. You should be apprehensive, but you should let that apprehension turn into growth, learn, ask questions. Now's the time. Don't just say I'm nervous and I'm going to bury my head and it'll figure itself out. This is the time to learn. So after this career, it's going on 23 years now. I've actually had time to now reflect on, because I'm not running 100 miles an hour anymore. And I look back and I sort of want to be a podcast. You talk about PTSD. And that's something that so I always tried, my position was always to try to keep the men and women safe. The people that worked under me, for me, together with me, my goal was to bring them home to their families the way that they showed up. That was my motto. I think that's the motto of any commanding officer in the New York City Police Department. And that's what I adhere to. But we always think of make sure you have your bulletproof vest, make sure your tactics are good. Give them the proper intel on what's going on currently in the precinct. And those are the tools that are very important. But at the same time, mental health for so long, the stigma on mental health was horrible, horrible. And I would see guys get these knee injuries and they tear their ACLs and they come back in on crutches. And I had to get a surgery and I went to this doctor and they did this big surgery on me, right? But you just saw countless people die from a virus, right? And you saw countless people, 7 people shot in one instance. You saw a baby die in a car accident or burning building. What about that? What about that? You right? And nobody wants to say hey, I went to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I sought help and, I'm better now. You guys should check that out. Nobody wants to talk about that, right? Because that's emasculating. That's not, you wouldn't be proud of that. That's something that it's a stigma towards it. So what I tried to do, and the reason that I tried to do this is because unfortunately, I lost too many friends and multiple colleagues to suicide. And all police officers and some very high ranking people. And unfortunately, on a few of those occasions, I responded to the 911 call of them being shot. And I'll never forget it. It's a memory there's certain memories that just stick with you. And those are the toughest for me. I always tell people I've been to a lot of police funerals where police officers have been killed in the line of duty. Been to, one is too many, and I've been to many more than that. I always feel like there's honor in it, though. There's honor when the commanding officer hands the flag to the next of kin, to the wife, to the husband, to the father. The helicopters fly over, the bagpipes are playing. They laid down their life for this city, this country. They did something honorable. They knew what they were getting themselves into. I'm not saying that I'm happy or the criminal nature of it is. No, it's terrible. It's a tragedy, but there's honor. But when somebody takes their own life, that bothers me because I feel like someone could have done something. Not always, but someone knows something. Someone knows, hey, my partner's not acting right. Something is wrong here. Somebody's acting a little different, drinking a little too much, maybe not drinking at all when they always, right? Something that the behavior's changing. But again, because of the stigma, Nobody wants to come out and say anything. So the New York City Police Department, within the last maybe 5 or 6 years, has done a fantastic job at getting ahead of this. And one year we had 19 suicides of active duty police officers. And on top of the 19 active duty, we had, I think it was like up over 30 that were retired members of the service. And once again, like I told you about the thwarted terrorist attacks, that if it doesn't happen, we don't talk about it.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many suicides that never happened, right? That somebody maybe had the gun in their mouth and then decided at the last minute, man, I'm going to take it out. And that never got reported. So we knew of 19 and maybe 33 retired. So it was becoming an epidemic. And I realized that, this hurts. And so I have to get ahead of this. And I would speak at every single roll call, every single time I had an audience with the police. To this day, when I'm in front of my supervisors at training and I'm giving them training, I tell them, protect your cops, protect them from themselves, drinking and driving during the holidays, protect them from civil liability, protect them, make sure they're wearing their vest, give them the tactics, make sure that they're give them the intel that they need. Where are the bad guys hanging out? And a lot of these young kids, I say kids, 21, 23, they live the life, by the what. They're not even thinking about mental illness until maybe you get a cancer diagnosis, or mom and dad maybe pass away, or there's a tragedy, or you have a daughter that's born with a severe illness. Now you're facing anxiety, stress. And how do you know how you're going to face that until you're actually faced with it? So breaking the stigma, giving them the resources, telling them to look out for one another, telling them that you're not going to be in any trouble for coming forward and we're going to get you help. It's something that I've become a big proponent on, because as I've had time to decompress, I realized these things don't go away in my head. Right there, sometimes you have these recurring nightmares. Sometimes you close your eyes and you think about that person that you knew and you saw them in such a horrific way, shot by their own hand, and you don't forget that. And you think, well, could I have done something differently? How could I have, affected something? So that's a big push that I talk about right now. And it's hard. It doesn't resonate as well with the younger generation, because again, they may not even have children. They might not have families. And then when you talk with the executives, they understand it a little bit more. But just getting that message out there is to me is so imperative.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys need to talk to your people. I mean, I saw it in just my little department I was part of. It's like guys come in and they deal with all this horrible stuff. Nobody asks them, how are you doing? Like he just came off this horrific accident. I think the biggest problem I have seen in law enforcement, and I've dealt with a lot of different agencies when I was working, the marshals and DEA, Homeland Security, a lot of these leaders have this tough guy attitude and they don't talk to their people, and they're the ones who are coming in hungover and just angry, and it just crushes morale. I think the best thing people could do amongst guys or just officers is talk to each other, like ask each other how you're doing, because holding all that stuff inside, I mean, after 20, 30 years, these guys, they just explode.
It's the worst. It's the worst when you see, and when you have access to firearms, it just becomes an easier out. I've seen it from people all the way at the end of their career, take their lives at 63 years old, to 21-year-old rookies that had a fight with their girlfriend and just couldn't handle it, and it was the love of their life. And again, the common denominator when we try to explore what happened and we do an analysis, usually, not always, but usually somebody's like, yeah, I knew something was off, but they didn't know what to do and they didn't want to get them in trouble. So that's why talking about that is so important. And now we kind of mandate where at the scene of any tragedy, we have our employee assistance unit does come out and just is there. And we'll say, hey, let's just talk for a little bit. And it's not like you have to contact them, or they'll be out there on the scene. Because like you said, there's that stigma. Most people, in order to get through these horrific things that they see, they have to just put it somewhere. They can't have it at the front, because if you're always thinking about those things, it's going to cloud your judgment and you can't move forward if that's what's in front of you. You have to get the mission done. But it's sometimes there has to come a point in your life where you have to say, okay, now I'm going to talk to somebody about this, whether it be a friend, family member, or professional. And it's not the end of the world, but I'm just going to talk about this and get this weight off my shoulders.
Absolutely. So you're working with the NYPD, and but on the side you have a consulting business. You're teaching leadership, and you are obviously an example of what a leader should be. People outside of the NYPD who want to get a hold of you and learn some of these leadership skills from you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so right now I'm pushing all my business. I'm doing a lot of content on Instagram. So it's blackwing.consulting. That's my Instagram handle. So you could just go on Instagram, but Blackwing Consulting LLC.com. So what I'm doing through that website, and it has all my information there. I tell people all the time, the free consultation, I'm doing a lot of one-on-one right now. I'm also going to be promoting a lot of leadership seminars for corporations and businesses. The one thing I've realized is leadership skills are applicable. I did not realize that. I thought, and I still have a lot of people who come to me and say, well, you're in law enforcement. What do you know about the corporate world, the private sector? And I asked them, what are the challenges, the biggest challenges you're facing right now? And I was talking to a bank manager, and she had told me that one of the biggest challenges we have is we have a high turnover. We have people that come in, we train them, we spend a lot of money and time and effort in training them. Then they stay here for a brief period of time, and they use that training that we gave them, and they go to the next bank or investment place, and they go there because they've already been trained, and they get $2 more an hour, but we can't match that money. So we lose employees constantly, and we're always short staffed. You don't think that in the NYPD, we have other agencies that are competitive, that have more money, that offer more? We give you the best training in the world, the NYPD. You're going to be even on site training. When you're out there, you're going to see a little bit of everything. You cannot replicate or duplicate that experience. But now you'll go to a smaller agency and make more money. Maybe the community will be, less violent or whatever. So it's, how do you compete with that? So they look at me and go, yeah, what do you do? Well, it starts with, how do you lead them? Do you lead with empathy and humility? Do you treat them with respect? I've seen so many people say, this isn't my dream job. So why do you stay? Because I love my boss. I would do anything. I'd go for walls through my boss. I have a great boss. I could never leave my boss. And I say, wow, that's great. And then to the flip side of that coin, so many people say, you know what? I thought this was going to be my dream job. I hate showing up to work because I have a micromanaging boss that just rides me all day long and treats me like I'm a piece of garbage. I don't care. I'll work anywhere. I'll take a pay cut tomorrow because I have to get out of here. This is a toxic work environment, and I'm working for a toxic leader. I always say, two types of leaders. Let's make it simple: effective and ineffective. It takes a lot to be an effective leader, and it doesn't take much to be ineffective. But again, that's what drives people away. So this branch manager looked at me and said, wow, yeah, that makes total sense. And we could, get down to the nitty gritty. Public speaking is one of my strong points, and I hated it. It was my biggest fear in life was public speaking, but I overcame it through constant practice, preparation, perseverance, and just continuously putting myself out there. I couldn't even do a podcast like this 10, 15 years ago. I'd say, I can't do it. Now you can't shut me up. But before, it was hard. It was difficult. But what I tell people to do is get in front of a small audience. Go in front of your family. They might laugh at you. Who cares? You explain to them, hey, I have a presentation at work and I'm just trying to work the nerves out. Sometimes when you hear yourself speak a little bit, go to a nursing home. I'm telling you, I've been to nursing homes, and I also teach religious instruction in my children's school. And we go to nursing homes. Elderly people love to see young, vibrant people. So you go to a nursing home, but trust me, if you mince your words, your vocabulary is not the best, or you get a little nervous, you get a little panic attack, they don't care. So go there, tell them, hey, the holidays are here. I just want to, wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is. But you're engaging in an audience. And these are things that, the one thing I've noticed from the private sector, from the clients that I've dealt with so far, a lot of it is transitioning into a role of leadership that they don't feel that they're ready for, they don't feel that they can handle, and they don't feel that they deserve. And so a lot of what I do is change their mindset. I talk through their, well, tell me why, explain to me. And I let them do so much more talking. Here I'm doing the talking because I'm trying to explain my life. But for them, I want to hear what it is. And then when we do our free consultations, I just listen and I take notes and I say to myself, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to build out a unique strategy just for you, personalized just for you, based on those challenges that you're facing right now. And I'm going to come up with a solution for you and we're going to work on it. We're going to implement it immediately. And what that's going to do, you're not going to do it alone. You're going to do it. I'm going to stand by your side for as long as you want. There's no commitment. If you say, hey, after one session, this guy, it's not working. I don't want to deal with it. That's okay. If you say, you know what, this is working. I want to stand by this person and I want them to help me further. We'll go as long as you want. It's like a gym membership. I always tell people, you could sign up to the gym, you go to the gym by yourself, but that's why they encourage you to get a personal trainer. And I've been working out for 30 plus years now at a gym, and I only got a personal trainer about 5 years ago. And I did a session with them because it was like a free promotion. And I was like, I've been working out my whole life. It changed my whole workout. It changed a lot of different things and it built on the skills that I already had. And I said, wow, a different approach, sometimes an impartial person and just somebody like leading you in a different direction. And guess what? If they didn't teach me anything, then I'd say, all right, there was nothing to lose. So I tell people there are so many challenges in leadership today that it's basic. And I think most people know it. They just kind of have to be led in that direction. And what I want to do is make their lives easier, because if you're successful as a leader, it's going to make your job so much easier and it's going to make those around you so much happier and more productive, which in turn is going to make you look good. So that's why I don't ask people, I'll turn a profit on it and it's a business. But at the same time, I have a job, I'm making money. So it's more about I saw success in what I'm doing in leadership, and the decisions that sometimes we make in the field cost people's lives or could be life costing. And so I realized that making decisions quickly and adhering to a mission at that level of importance, and I started to bring that out to the private sector, and knowing that these skills are all applicable and seeing the success now in the private sector and having people thank me, it's once again another rewarding thing. And I want to help people, and that's it. So if I can help people outside of law enforcement, that's great, and that's what I'm aiming to do.
Well, Jonathan, I sure appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. You've led quite the career and continued success and safety out there, man. I really do appreciate everything you've done for your community and this country. So thank you much for joining me. I'll add all your links and everything into the bio of this podcast, and I appreciate your time, man.
And I'm going to get everybody to follow you. I tell you, you're doing a great thing just by putting people's stories out there. Just keep putting those great stories out there that people have. And that's awesome. I appreciate what you're doing, and we'll stay in touch, brother.
I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care, man.